The Abdication of King Edward VIII, Love versus Crown. In the winter of 1936, London lay shrouded in fog, but the chill that hung in the air came from more than the season. Behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, the throne of the British Empire trembled. At its center stood a king who had worn the crown for less than a year, already facing a choice no monarch before him had dared to make: the love of a woman or the loyalty to his crown. Edward VIII had never been the typical king in waiting. Born in 1894, he was raised in privilege, but also under the crushing weight of duty. Yet, unlike the stiff, reserved monarchs before him, Edward was charming, modern, and glamorous. Adored by the public for his film star looks and his easy, almost casual way of connecting with ordinary people. Newspapers hailed him as the Golden Prince who would bring the monarchy into a new age. But behind the Polish was a restless soul. He disliked ceremony, distrusted rigid tradition, and was known for a rebellious streak that quietly unsettled his family and advisors. That restlessness would soon collide with the greatest test of his life. In the early 1930s, Edward met Wallis Simpson, an American socialite who was witty, bold, and twice divorced. To Edward, she was irresistible. Where courtiers demanded silence and reverence, Wallis spoke her mind. Where the palace walls suffocated him, she brought laughter, daring, and a sense of freedom. Edward was captivated. Their relationship grew into a love affair that consumed him, one that he did not hide. He introduced her into circles of influence, showered her with jewels, and made it known to friends that she was not just a companion, but the center of his life. For Edward, she was not a scandal, she was salvation. But to Britain's establishment, she was unacceptable. The King of England was also the head of the Church of England, which forbade the marriage of a divorced woman whose ex-husband still lived. To many, Wallis was scandalous, a threat to the sanctity of the crown and the image of the monarchy. When Edward's father, King George V, died in January 1936, Edward ascended to the throne. The world celebrated a new monarch, young, charismatic, and adored by the people. Yet almost immediately, the tension between the crown and his heart grew impossible to ignore. Edward was determined to marry Wallis Simpson, but the British government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, warned him that such a marriage would be politically and morally disastrous. The empire was vast, bound together by tradition, faith, and the monarchy's symbolic authority. To have a king with a twice-divorced American wife was unthinkable. Newspapers in Britain, long silent on the affair, began to break the story to the public. Citizens who had admired their dashing king now found themselves caught between admiration and shock. Behind palace doors, tempers flared. Advisors and politicians told Edward bluntly that he could not have both, the crown and Wallis. He must choose. Edward, deeply in love, refused to abandon her. His devotion was unshakable, even as the crisis grew into one of the greatest constitutional struggles in British history. Finally, in December 1936, the inevitable came. Edward summoned his resolve and made his decision. On December 10th, at Fort Belvedere, his private residence, he signed the instrument of abdication. With the stroke of a pen, he surrendered the throne that had been his birthright. The next evening, he addressed the nation by radio, his voice steady but weighted with emotion. "I have found it impossible," he said, "to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king without the help and support of the woman I love." His words echoed through every household in Britain, stunning his subjects. The following day, his younger brother was proclaimed King George VI, thrust unexpectedly into the role. He would guide Britain through the peril of World War II, while Edward slipped quietly from power into a life defined not by duty, but by love. 6 months later, in June 1937, Edward married Wallis Simpson in France. He was given the title Duke of Windsor, but Wallis was denied the style of Her Royal Highness, a decision that left the couple bitter. They spent much of their lives in exile, moving between France and America, welcomed by high society, but kept at arm's length by the royal family. Their life was luxurious yet lonely, gilded but overshadowed by what had been lost. For some, Edward was a tragic figure who had thrown away a kingdom for romance. For others, he was selfish, a man who put personal desire above the immense responsibility of the throne. Yet the abdication of Edward VIII reshaped history in ways no one could have predicted. His brother George VI, shy and unprepared, rose to the occasion, becoming a symbol of courage and stability during Britain's darkest hour in World War II. And George's daughter, Elizabeth, would later ascend the throne, beginning one of the longest and most iconic reigns in history. Edward VIII's choice remains one of history's most dramatic royal decisions. A king who walked away from an empire, not for war, not for politics, but for love. It was a story of devotion, rebellion, and sacrifice. Even now, decades later, one question lingers. Was Edward's abdication the greatest act of romance, or the greatest act of recklessness? Did he betray his people, or did he finally prove that even kings are bound by the heart? Whatever the answer, the world remembers him not for his reign, but for his surrender, the man who gave up a crown for the woman he could not live without. Thank you all so much for watching.